And Andrew Bailey warning of an apocalyptic jump in food prices, and he puts most of it down to the war in Ukraine.
I'm afraid the one that I am going to sound, I guess, rather apocalyptic about is food. This is a big concern because I think two things that the Ukrainian finance minister said. One is Ukraine does have food in store, but it can't get it out at the moment. Two, while he was optimistic about crop planting, as you know, Ukraine is a major supplier of wheat, major supplier of oil, of cooking oils. And he said, he was pretty optimistic about planting, interestingly, but he said at the moment, we have no way of shipping it out. As things stand at the moment, it's getting worse. And that is a major worry, and it's not just, I have to tell you, a major worry for this country, it is a major worry for the developing world as well.
Yeah, we'd spoken about this about a month ago on the show. We had the Environment Secretary, George Eustace, talking about the impact on food prices here. We also spoke to Dr. John Rich. He's the chair of MHP, Ukraine's biggest grain producer. So we thought we'd check in with again to see where we are. Hiya, John.
Yes, good morning.
When we spoke before, we were sort of, it was the early days of the conflict. We weren't quite sure what the impact was going to be. It's now becoming pretty clear. The key issue is there is grain. Ukraine is one of the biggest grain producers in the world. There is grain in Ukraine, but we can't get it out. Is that right?
Yeah, well, that's correct. Actually, I was on CNBC this morning with our governor, and I echo his concerns. The biggest problem is that we have around about 20 million plus tonnes of grain in store left over from last year. We're going into a winter crop program where we'll probably harvest 35 million tonnes, maybe around about a third less than normal. And then we're going into a summer crop program, which around about 70% will probably be planted. And of that, we'll probably produce around another 40 million tonnes. So where are we? I mean, the key issue is that we, at the beginning of this war, made the decision to plant along the lines of the Ukrainian government's directive. Everybody planted that they could. But effectively what we did have was the cart in front of the horse, because what we didn't know was how we were going to get that grain out. Now, today, where we're sitting a month later since I spoke to you last, we have an issue. We have definitely planted. In our particular case, we've planted almost 100% of our lands. A lot of people are like us. I would expect a very good season at present. So far to date, that's the case. So where's our backlog? And where's our problem? The problem is all about logistics. The 3 L's, logistics, logistics, and logistics. We have last year exported 46 million tonnes between the fourth quarter of last year and the first 2 months of this year. So that's a lot of grain. We produced around about 80 million tonnes last year. Now, our problem today is that we are now filling all our storages in harvest time in probably 6 to 8 weeks' time, and our ports are closed, and we only have the ability at present, technically, to cross around about 1 million tonnes per month across into the EU and to the rest of the world, which is annualised about 12 million tonnes over a year, to replace the ports, which exported between 60 and 80 million tonnes. And therein lies the central bank's apocalypse theory, because it's no theory, it is a serious issue.
Is there any prospect? I mean, clearly, a lot depends on what's happening on the military side, but given that Russian troops seem to be being pushed back by Ukraine, is there any prospect of finding a route that would allow the logistics to kick in?
Look, the easiest route at present that's not directly, well, it is indirectly affected, is Odessa, and that's the biggest port. If we can open Odessa, then there is significant light in the tunnel. But the problem is that not a lot of ship owners are going to be, I would say, immediately enthused in sending ships in there, which they can't insure, especially when 1 or 2 of them have been hit by Russian missiles. So I would suggest that while we could open the port, we would really need some sort of armistice or ceasefire to allow that grain port to be opened with the Russian authorities. If we did that, we would be able to solve the key problem. But today, even though the EU Commission have done an enormous amount of work and studies in trying to increase the volume of grains and soft commodities across the EU borders, maybe we could get to 1.5 million tonnes a month, maybe, but it's a long, slow process. It's nothing speedy, and yet we're harvesting in 6 weeks. So, it's a tough gig.
And just finally, in terms of the amount that's in storage, if at some point this conflict ends, the Russians retreat, we can then get the grain out of Ukraine. Does that mean we might suddenly see a big sharp drop in prices, or actually, because as you were saying, it's about a third of normal capacity, that's we'd still be short?
Well, look, Matt, the interesting thing I discussed this morning is the fact that what does the real price in the CME mean today? I mean, you've got to understand that in forward markets and in hedging, often there's a disconnect between the physical supply and demand of people really truly hedging and those hedge funds that are working in the marketplace. Now, generally, 80% of price movements, particularly volatile ones, are often driven by hedge funds. So you're asking me the question, is the prices too high today, and does that relate to supply and demand at present? It's a little bit early to say. My thesis would be that if prices went above $14 a bushel for wheat, I would be saying that that's probably very much fueled by hedge fund interest more so than the real market.
Well, we'll keep an eye on it. It's good to speak to you again, John, and we'll keep in touch. That's Dr. John Rich. He's the chair of MHP, Ukraine's biggest grain producer. It's fascinating how it's so dependent on one country. Unfortunately, that country has been invaded by Russia. We'll keep our eyes on that.